Hello everybody, this is a lecture of Ancient Indian Survey, and today we are going to talk about Buddhism and Jainism. We are not going to specifically look at these religious groups and their teachings, but we are going to today in this lecture look at the background to the rise of these religious sections or these religious groups. What were the economic and social factors which led to the rise of Buddhism and Jainism in 6th century BC in the Indian subcontinent. As far as we know the Indian subcontinent till now, we know that there was a Harappan civilization, there was a Vedic age, there was a later Vedic age, and now we are at this particular point where we need to know about what was beyond the later Vedic age, or what was the so-called post-Vedic age. In this particular time period, we are going to look at certain political formations, certain economic backgrounds to those formations, and certain social realities of the time. We have talked about the social realities in the past as well. We know the emergence of caste system and the ritualistic practices that were there in the Indian subcontinent, and we are going to contextualize them in these particular aspects in context of the rise of Buddhism and Jainism. So, the time period that we are at right now is 6th century BC, which is a period of transition, which is a period of new historical developments in the Indian subcontinent, especially in the northern Indian plains, and there are developments of political nature as well. We know that there were emergence of these political entities known as Gana Sanghas, G-A-N-A-S-A-N-G-H-A. They were a form of a proto-state, because a state is something that is a more developed and advanced form of political formation, and Gana Sanghas are classified or termed as a kind of proto-state. Till now we know from the history that we have read of the ancient Indian period, we know that in the Aryan period and in the later Vedic period, Vedic and later Vedic period, we have these tribal affiliations and tribal formations and these struggles that are taking place on those lines. But with the emergence of with the dawn of the 6th century BC, we know that there is a movement towards the formation of a proper state. Now, to clarify here, the tribal affinities, the affinities to a clan or to a common ancestor do not necessarily have in themselves the association to a particular land. And we know that Aryans had migrated from particular regions to the northern Indian plains, and then they were also on the move in the northern Indian plains towards the east. Right, we have come across that, and it was only in this time period, in the post-Vedic age, in the post-Vedic period, that there started to develop certain affinities or certain attachments to land as as a defining factor of an identity of a particular group. Right, so clan affinities and tribal affinities are there, but now they are going to be attached to certain lands as well, certain territories as well, right. So this when territory and population and affinities and a political formation combine, they become a state in the proper sense of the term, right. So there is a movement or development towards that state, and Gana Sangha is one of the steps towards that development, right. This is something that we know, and by 600 BC onwards, we know of this is a background, and from 600 BC onwards, we know that there is this time period of the Mahajanapadas, right. They are like Maha means larger or greater, and we know that these Mahajanapadas were state states in that sense. These each of these Mahajanapadas can be identified or can be understood as a state in themselves. We know of 16 of them. That is why we know the time period. We know a particular time period is called a period of 16 Mahajanapadas in the Indian history, and these 16 Mahajanapadas names are recorded in Buddhist traditions and Buddhist texts. What are these 16 Mahajanapadas? We'll just name them and we'll just go into the details of what briefly on where they were located geographically. So just do not be confused. Ganasanghas is a step earlier than the formation of Mahajanapadas, and Mahajanapadas, some of them conformed to the definition of what we understand as a state, which has various elements, including a fixed territory, including a fixed population, including certain sovereignty, including political authority and a system of administration, right? And there can be more details to the formation of to the characteristics of a state, but these are some of the basics that were there in some of the Mahajanapadas. That is why they can be termed as states. Okay. Now, what are these Mahajanapadas? We know of Anga, Magadha and Vriji and Mallas. These were in the Gangetic plains, or the Gangetic valley in that sense. Then we have Kashi, Koshala and Vatsa, which were to the west. Then we have Kuru, Panchala, Matsya and Shurasena, which were further west. So there is a huge geographical expanse. Then we have Kamboja and Gandhara to the northwest. We know Gandhara through Mahabharata because it's an important location. We know of Panchala as well in Mahabharata, right? So these terms were there in the later Vedic period, and eventually they emerged as these Mahajanapadas, these state formations. Then we have Avanti and Chedi in the western and central India, and then we have Asaka towards the Deccan, right? So this is a huge expanse, a wide expanse of the 16 Mahajanapadas. Some of them are towards the east, some of them are towards the west, and some of them are also in the Deccan region. And the names of some of these Mahajanapadas we have come across in the later Vedic period, which suggests that there was a continuity from there to the post-Vedic period of Mahajanapadas, and eventually over a period of time the tribal associations developed into the formation of a proper state, right? Of these, three were republics, Vriji, Mallas and Asaka, and the process of the emergence of these states is usually associated with the process of urban development or urbanization, and that is why we also understand this time period in the northern Indian region as the second urbanization. Why do we know it as second urbanization? Obviously because the first urbanization or the first urban settlement or urban setup was in the Harappan civilization, in the Indus Valley civilization, right? And this particular period of the Mahajanapadas is understood to be as the second urbanization, and we know that there are certain precursors that need to be there to have the process of an urbanization as such. And the most important of these reasons is the presence of surplus produce, or the surplus means of surplus means of production in that sense. So we have evidence of a surplus produce and surplus production in this time period. That is why, because why do we need surplus produce? Very logical, that the urban centers or the urban people cannot feed themselves through agricultural means, and there needs to be enough agricultural produce to feed these non-agricultural urban population, and that is why presence of a surplus produce or surplus amount of production is important for the creation of urban centers, right? How was this made possible? We already know that in the later Vedic period there was a shift towards agriculture, even though the early Vedic people were mostly pastoralists, but there was a development of agriculture. We know of that. We've already learned about that, the coming of plough and everything. And we know that there was the presence of iron as well, and we know that the Vedic people, later Vedic people, had come across the cultivation of rice. So probably it is argued by scholars that it was through a process of 2 crops per year, cultivating 2 crops per year, that enough surplus produce was procured in order to sustain a vibrant urban population, which led to the creation of the urban centers, and hence led to the second urbanization of the Indian subcontinent, right. This is a brief political and economic background to the time period that we are going to study today, to the time period in which Buddhism and Jainism rose, and we need to know what are the sources for this time period. For us, the sources are mainly the Buddhist texts, especially the Buddhist Pali texts, a collection of texts known as Tripitikas, and of these we know of 3, and I'll just briefly tell you about them. The first one is the Vinaya Pitaka, which means rules, which had the rules and regulations of Buddhist canon. Then we have Sutta Pitaka, which is which contains lectures delivered by Gautama Buddha, and we have Abhidhamma Pitaka, which is a text focusing on the philosophical and ethical and psychological aspects of the Buddhist traditions, right. So these are the sources that we have for the time period that we are going to discuss. Further, we also need to understand that there were these how do we define the time period that we are going to talk about in the terms of the material culture that was sustained in these regions, because more often certain cultures are identified by their archaeological names. For example, they are identified by the pottery that was found in these places, and we have already talked about how painted graveware is the pottery which is associated with the later Vedic period, right. And in this time period, in the post Vedic Mahajanapada period as well, we have pottery. There is before going into the time periods, we need to understand that there are at a number of places overlaps in these archaeological cultures. When I say material cultures, material means physical remains, and physical remains means these pottery sherds that were found, and there are in certain places overlaps and continuities and these things. So we don't need to be very confused about it. There is no clear cut demarcation of one type of historical formation to another. We classify them on time periods for our own understanding, but there are still many overlaps and many continuities that are there. Okay, now painted graveware, right? We know of painted graveware. We know painted graveware was the pottery or the archaeological tag associated with the later Vedic period, which we understood from 1200 BC to 600 BC or 1000 BC to 500 BC. Right, any of those 2 timelines. So painted graveware is the time is found for the time period of 1200 BC to 400 BC. Now 400 BC falls in the time period that we are talking about, because we know that from 600 BC onwards, the Mahajanapadas is the time of Mahajanapadas, right? And there is another type of pottery which was found further east, that is known as black and red ware, or BRW, and there were further another kind of pottery known as northern black polished ware, NBPW, right. And the time period of these potteries was 700 BC to 200 BC, right. So these exactly fall in the time period that we are talking about. So we know we don't need to get confused. These are just the time periods classified in terms of the various archaeological or material remains that were found in certain regions, right. Now we need to talk about the social aspects of it, and we are just going to conclude with looking at the social and certain economic aspects which were immediately responsible for the rise of the Buddhist and the Jain traditions, right. But before going into that, we need to understand that in the later Vedic period, we already talked about that there was a hierarchy, a category, a classification that was done, and from 800 to 600 BC, there was strong rigidities in the later Vedic period that had set in the social system, especially in the caste system. When I say social system, I mean mostly the caste system of the later Vedic period, and there were rigidities that had formed and formed themselves in the time period of 800 BC to 600 BC, right. And we also know that there were certain people or certain vagabonds in that sense who did not want to be fit in that hierarchy or in that classification done by the Vedic society, and we know that some of them even turned ascetics, and they turned into these people who wandered around, and this is also a very major important aspect of the later Vedic society, because the people who had fit in those categories, in those classifications, were the mainstream, were the main like social formation. But there was again a thought process which contradicted that entire setup of Vedic society, and it is from these ascetic unorthodox elements that these traditions of Jainism and Buddhism emerged, right. So there were these groups who used these people who have been termed as wandering sophists, or people having unorthodox and philosophical unorthodox thinking, and who were keen in philosophical observation. They used to gather in places known as kutuhala shalas. Like these were places where the people gathered, usually in a park or in any location, and they used to sit and discuss. There were debates, and as a result of this, there were certain criticisms that had emerged regarding the already present social system, and it was out of these criticisms of the already present Brahmanical Vedic system that Buddhism and Jainism emerged, right. Let's just talk about the rise of Buddhism and Jainism now. We know that we know the economic background and the political background to it. And the social background is the main aspect on which usually the rise of Buddhism and Jainism is explained, right. So primarily, when certain reasons are given by scholars for the rise of Buddhism and Jainism, the act of overcoming Brahmanism is seen as a very important reason, right, because we have already talked about how rigidities were there, how there were certain discriminations, how Brahmins had centralized power in their hands, and they did not want to share power even with the second category, or the second category or second caste in the hierarchy, that is the Kshatriyas. And Vaishyas and Shudras were even further oppressed, especially the Shudras. So this created a kind of society which was unhappy. This created a kind of society where there were a lot of tensions which were not attended to, which were not catered to, and this was obviously because of the rigidities that were there. If there would have been a scope of social mobility, there wouldn't have been these tensions or these tussles between various castes in that sense. And the main castes, or the main groups, castes basically, who were unhappy were the Kshatriyas and the Vaishyas. Now we know that Kshatriyas are the second highest, but even though that they are the highest, they are the rulers, they are the warriors, they did not have the highest authority, and they were subservient to the Brahmanical category or the Brahmanical caste, and that was something that they did not like, and that was something they wanted to remove. So they wanted to be the top of the hierarchy because they were the people who were fighting the battles, who were winning the territories, who were running the administration, and then because of the Brahmanical Vedic setup, they were still answerable, or they had to still were ritualistically below the Brahmanical category or the Brahmanical caste. So we have Kshatriyas. We know that Kshatriyas were unhappy on this front, and obviously Vaishyas were unhappy because they were oppressed on certain fronts, and Shudras because they were oppressed by all the three upper castes. In the rise of Buddhism and Jainism, we see important role being played by these two middle castes, because Shudras were too oppressed to take any further or concrete action regarding their oppression. So there was these Kshatriyas and Vaishyas who had their own interests in mind, and it was because of these Kshatriyas and Vaishyas that the Buddhist traditions and the Jain traditions were supported by them, they were funded by them and on certain fronts, and they were upheld by them. So it was a reaction to the Brahmanical domination from the Kshatriyas and the Vaishyas that these Buddhist and Jain traditions benefited from this reaction to the Brahmanical overlordship over the entire society, entire social organization. And they were Kshatriyas and Vaishyas were the main forces in that sense behind the rise of these new religious trends or these new religious thoughts. Further, it is also argued by certain scholars that there was an attempt to further agriculture, and in that process of furthering agriculture, the cattle were very important, and there were certain sacrifices that were done by the Vedic people, which included the killing of cattle, or animal sacrifices were done in the later Vedic period, and this was something that was not beneficial to the people who wanted to further agriculture with the help of these animals, and that is why there was a reaction in the economic context as well towards the later Vedic society, which was focused on, which had amongst its rituals the animal sacrificing aspect. Further ahead, another economic reason is here, which is given by scholars, that there was a need to further trade and commerce, and this is the category, or this is the activity that is usually attributed to the third section of the caste society, the third caste of the caste of the Vedic social order, that is the Vaishyas. And there was no great efforts or attention given to the development of trade in the later Vedic period, and it was an attempt to further the trade and to extend this trade and commerce, that new religions were supported by this third category or the third caste, Vaishyas, so that these Vaishyas can benefit from the trade and commerce, and the religions or the religious thought which supported or which upheld or which furthered the growth of trade and commerce were supported by Vaishyas. So this was a mutual symbiotic relationship between the religious thoughts, religious thinking that supported and that furthered the trade and commerce activities, and Vaishyas who benefited from these trade and commerce activities. They supported or they lent their aid to the development of those religions and those religious thought. Further, there was also a philosophical angle to it. We have looked at the social and economic, a social reason and two economic reasons, and there was also a philosophical aspect to it, because we know that in the very beginning, in the early Vedic times, the setup was very ascetic. There was hardly, there were not that many there was not that much paraphernalia that was there, and there was an attempt to return to that original ascetic ascetic type of living, or the original ascetic ideal, original philosophical connection between God and human being, without those unending rituals, without those unending methods that were developed over a period of time in the later Vedic society. And this was why, because the ordinary people who were in the majority, the Shudras and other castes which had emerged or which had developed with the expansion of the Vedic domain, they were not happy, they were not satisfied with the type of society that they were in, and they wanted to return to a ascetic ideal or ascetic original religious thought, which would connect them directly to God. So this was a philosophical aspect to the development of Buddhism and Jainism, because Buddhist and Jain thought in the beginning, they were very philosophical, they were mostly philosophical traditions. There was the development of this religion in a later phase. Originally, the founders were keen, deep thinkers. They were, when we will talk about Buddha and Mahavira, we would know that these people were mostly philosophical in their bent of mind, and it was through various philosophical discussions and speeches that were given by them. So there was not the element of religion per se that was there in the beginning, as far as Buddhism and Jainism are concerned, but there were these philosophical aspects that were there to Buddhism and Jainism, which led to later to the development of these religious entities in that sense. And we know we'll talk about Buddhism and Jainism separately, and their ideals and their religious doctrines in a separate lecture, but we need to know that following this particular transformation in the 6th century BC, there was this emergence of these groups, 6th and the 5th centuries BC, and eventually we have the domination by them, because some of them, some of the political formations also gave their allegiance and gave their support to these philosophical religious traditions. And it was only in the 8th century AD, with the coming of Shankaracharya and his thought, that the and with the revival and reformation of Brahmanical thought in 8th century AD under the thought process of Shankaracharya, that Brahmanism could make a comeback, and it was for this time period Buddhism and Jainism were the dominant philosophical religious traditions. Thank you.